Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to the November edition of Molten Music Monthly. It's November, it's a festival to celebrate that big black god of Fridays, who's decided that it's un-American for retailers to have more than one day off a year, and so we worship his mild deals on electrical items. Actually, Moog are having a sale of up to 30% off, so go and get your credit card. But this month's shock news is that Gibson have pulled the plug on Cakewalk. But also coming up, Steinberg release a quite stunning half-point update to Cubase. Ableton drip out the details of what they think is fitting for an entire version upgrade. Annoyingly named 000 release the mixing module I've always been after. MIDI Quest bring the 1990s editor librarian to the iPad. There are sequencers of all sorts like the Varigate 4 Plus, the Toolbox, the Quencer DLX and the Hermod brain thing. There's some cool software weirdness with MusineKit2 and Gleetchlab4. I check out a software mixer called CMixer. Touch Innovations realise that subscription models suck. And the next generation of MIDI gets talked about. That'll do, let's get to it. Now, probably the biggest news story of recent days is the death of Cakewalk. That's it, Sonar is no more. One of the longest serving Windows-only DAWs has had it. It's gone. It's had the rug pulled away from under its feet. It's kaput. It's no more. It's gone. It's dead. It's yeah, anyway. Gibson Brands, who weirdly owns Cakewalk, they bought it in 2013, has decided that it just doesn't really match up with their future vision for what the heck it is that they think they're doing. I thought they were about guitars, but I don't even know if they're doing that very well these days. Poor old Les Paul is spinning in his grave. But it is very, very sad. I mean, Cakewalk Express, I think it was the first sequencer I ever used on a PC back in the 1990s. And Sonar is one of the biggest products out there. I mean, it's huge. In America in particular, I mean, it's really great for bands and sort of songwriters, singer-songwriters, composers, band leaders, that kind of feel, country and Western music. Anything which records live instruments and mixes it all together in a jumble of stuff. That's what Sonar has always excelled at. And it just seems really bizarre that it would just be gone. There's a huge user base of devoted fans and people out there who really dig the way it does stuff. And for those people, this is just a terrible thing to have to go through because you invest in the software that you use. You feel attached to it personally in some ways because it helps you create. It's the environment in which you build your music and produce your stuff. It is in some strange virtual ways like the physicality of your studio. It's what surrounds you. It's the place where you spend all your time. And for some idiot to decide that that's no longer going to be happening just seems so unfair. These days, apparently Gibson is in a lot of trouble financially, and so I guess from their point of view it makes sense to get rid of the weird stuff that they bought. Why did they buy it from Roland back in 2013? It made no sense then and it makes no sense now. I mean, maybe it was the move to the subscription model. Maybe it was that killed it, because it still grates. It grates with all of us, the subscription model. It just doesn't seem to really work. I mean, it works with some things. I mean, I subscribe to Adobe, for instance, to get Photoshop for sort of a tenner a month, but largely I feel the community wants to buy a piece of software and then use it for as long as they want and then upgrade if they want, not be forced into this kind of cycle of constant payment. I think that's done Cakewalk a lot of damage. And also on the side of visibility, because you don't have these big releases. It's like with Steinberg, I'm going to talk about in a minute, they've just got this big release that they've come up with, which is great. And all the press goes crazy. Yeah, it's a big release. Look at all this. We can talk about it. And I'm talking about it in a minute. But when you have a subscription service and you're constantly releasing little updates and little updates, you don't get that opportunity to wave flags and go, yeah, this is great. Because you don't have those big launches. You just have this drip feed. And that is a marketing disaster, really. So anybody else there thinking about subscriptions, don't do it. Don't do it to your products. Don't do it to your user base. Use Cakewalk as an example of how that can all just fall apart around your ears. Who knows? But if you are a Sonar user out there and are wondering what to do next, well, here's what I'd recommend. Go and check out Studio One. Studio One from Presonus. It's also American, so it'll have that familiar vibe to it. It's very good at audio. It's ideally placed for recording bands and big productions and that kind of thing. But also the MIDI side isn't bad either. It comes with some good instruments and bits and pieces and plugins and stuff. Great mixing console, a great clean and sort of calmed down interface. I mean, Sonar is very, very busy, so you'll find that moving to Studio One will be a very calming exercise. However, if craziness is what you like, or if you're a bit more into the MIDI side of Sonar, then check out FL Studio 12. It's amazing. It's Italian, I think, but don't hold that against it. It's full of weird ways of dealing with MIDI and audio in fascinating and exciting, jumbled up kind of craziness. So those would be the two I recommend. Obviously any DAW is going to be similar to the way Sonar works, but they would be the two that I recommend trying out first. But I just can't quite wrap my head around it. I mean, isn't it worth selling? I mean, wouldn't Magix buy it, or Behringer maybe, or maybe even Microsoft? I mean, I've always had a really close relationship with Microsoft, which hasn't ever seemed to have sort of flowered into anything. I mean, maybe this is an opportunity for Microsoft to poach a few DAW programmers to finally get on and release their own Groove Music Maker thing. Maybe that could work. I don't know. If you're out there, Microsoft, throw them a few quid. Steal those people and do something awesome with it. In any case, I wish all of the Cakewalk employees the very, very best in the future with whatever it is you do. Meanwhile, on the other side of the pond, Steinberg are kind of doing everything right. They've taken themselves up to version 9.5, which looks like an uncommonly impressive upgrade. When they went to version 9, they brought in a lot of new stuff, a new look and a new sort of way of thinking. They adopted a number of things from other DAWs and plugged that in to Cubase. And it sounds as if they've spent the time since then listening to their user base and seeing what it is that they want and what they've liked about the new way of thinking, how they can improve, the new zones and the areas and all that sort of thing. And the update comes across as this response to user commentary, which is awesome. That's what you want, I think. So what's new? Well, Cubase has now got a fully 64-bit architecture, which means, oh, I don't know, better quality audio, smoother running, that kind of thing. Who knows? It's more bits, it's bound to be better. They've done some interesting things to the side bay. At the side, they've stuck some metering in there, some loudness metering, some control room functionality is all much easier to get to there, which I think is a really nice idea. They've also done something interesting to the browser or the media bay, which has always driven me crazy. I always ignore the media bay. I've never found that useful. And now they are sort of returning that to more of a regular file browser. Because the weird thing is that you tend to know where your files are. You don't need a media bay which you have to feed sort of folders into that it then watches and then decides to throw up stuff. No, you just want a file browser because you know where you stuck your stuff and now you can just go to it and drag it into your project. Easy. That's what you need. They've done a lot of work on the automation. It's now very, very curvy. Lots of Bezier curves and loveliness going on in order to get some lovely smoothness into the automation. That's really nice. In the mixer console side of things, they've now doubled up on the inserts. You have 16 insert chains on a single channel that you can put pre or post fader. You can now stuff plugins onto individual clips, so you can stack up a bunch of plugins and either process them offline or just leave them hanging about. They've updated a load of other plugins that have been there forever. Some things have finally got that GUI upgrade they've always been after. And within the Halion Sonic instrument that comes with it, they've now stuck a new wavetable instrument in there as well, which seems to be a bit of a flavour of the month, adding a wavetable. Reason did it, Ableton are going to do it, and Steinberg have done it as well. Wavetable is the thing that you need, so it seems. There's a new video engine in there. There's all sorts of bits and pieces being tweaked and enhanced. You can now drag and drop not just audio into the sampler, but MIDI as well. If you drag a MIDI clip into the sampler, it will automatically render it and stick it in there as audio. Fantastic. The little sampler thing within Cubase was just simply genius. It's a great little thing, a great thing for your workflow, a great creative way of just pulling out little bits and doing interesting things with them. I think it's an awesome little thing. And they've taken it upon themselves to change the metronome. I mean, the metronome is iconic. The Cubase metronome noise is the one that you always hear whenever there's a metronome going on. It's that one. It's stolen by everybody else and used by everybody else. But now Steinberg have decided, screw this, we're going to change the metronome. You can now have whatever sound you like. You can have it in any sort of pattern, any kind of time signature. Do whatever you like with it. which is oddly, I don't know, something I'd ever want to do, I don't know. But for those who do, for those who are troubling around in difficult time signatures and in the way that tempo moves, then that's quite an extraordinary thing. So it's like in a climate of subscriptions, in a climate of expensive upgrades or underwhelming updates, Steinberg really seemed to have knocked this out of the park. And it's a point update. It's not even a full update. This isn't Cubase 10, this is Cubase 9.5. And yet there's so much stuff in there, so many improvements, and a sense that they are listening. Above all else, that really just makes it stand apart from pretty much every upgrade I've seen in the last couple of years. So, good job, Steinberg. Good job. The other big news of the month was the long-anticipated announcement of Ableton Live 10. It leaked and it leaked and it leaked, and then finally it was here. It's going to be available early next year, I think, and it's been nearly 5 years since version 9 came along. And although it's had lots of sort of regular little updates, taking it all the way up to 9.7 is where I think it is now, it does look tired and slightly uninspired. So what's new? Well, first of all, it has a cool new synth. It's a wavetable synth. Yes, of course it is a polyphonic wavetable synth, and it actually looks and sounds pretty awesome, like that. They've thrown in an echo plugin, which is great because their delay preset device things, I don't like them. I've always hated them. I've struggled to find a decent delay in Ableton, which just seems weird. But anyway, so they've added a new echo plugin, which looks great. Yeah, I'll go for that. They've also included a guitar overdrive sort of stompbox style-y, but you know, it looks like any other device, which is kind of that thing with Ableton, and that everything is grey and flat and uninteresting. They don't seem able to pull a decent GUI out of themselves, other than to go with the same one all the time. This is how everything is. You can't possibly tell the difference between anything because it all looks the same. They've done something better with the Echo one and with the wavetable synth. They seem to have managed to make them look at least individual or independent or something slightly different. But with the Stompbox one, no, it just looks like the same as everything else, which is a shame. I mean, even Bitwig are able to add a little bit of colour and excitement to it. Oh well. You can now reorganize your groups and put groups within groups, which is great. You can now see and edit more than one clip at a time. Ooh. You can also now edit audio clips on the arrange page rather than having to do it in the editor. You can get stuck in and make changes and move things around on the arrange page itself within the clip. They've improved the browser, thank God. Max for Live is now built in to Live. Wasn't it kind of built in already? I don't know, no one really understands what Max for Live is all about. It just seems to be able to give us a whole bunch of really interesting devices that don't exist in Ableton on its own. But the best standout feature is probably the background recording. The idea of this is that you're just tinkling away on your keyboard and you go, wow, that was amazing, I wish I'd recorded that. And now Live gives you the ability to go, bump, I did record that. Ha ha ha. So that's kind of cool, but there's no real mention of how far back in time that goes. You know, you're playing all night during a session, you're going, oh yeah, that thing I did at 3 o'clock in the morning, now that was genius. Boom, there it is. Is that going to work? That seems somehow unlikely. The whole look has been polished to some kind of degree, so it is getting a little bit of a refresh. It does appear to be less tired, perhaps, a bit more inspiring than it was. But ultimately, you're getting a new synth, a couple of new plug-in devices, and it's sort of catching up on other doors in terms of editing MIDI and audio. And they've tidied up the interface a bit. Oh, they have made a lot of improvements to the push integration with the hardware. So if you own the push hardware, that's great for you. If you don't, that's irrelevant. I mean, I'm trying to be enthusiastic about it. I mean, I'm an Ableton user. I will continue to use it. I think it's an awesome piece of software, and particularly for live performance, it can be outstanding. And some of the most creative stuff I've seen is done in Ableton Live. And yet with this version 10, they seem to be failing to innovate. There's some good stuff, yeah, and the tweaks and everything is all good, all positive. That's all what we want. It's just not taking us to new places. And how much is this upgrade? Well, for the Suite version, it's over 200 quid. How much was the Cubase one? 59 quid. But, you know, we haven't had to upgrade for about 5 years, so maybe that's not so bad. Touch Innovations have decided to rethink their decision to move to a subscription model for Emulator 2. Who is Touch Innovations? Well, these are the current owners of the Emulator Touch Control MIDI controller software. It was created by a company called Smith & Martin, and a few years ago I was a huge advocate for it. I loved it. It was just the best thing. You could create your own customized MIDI controller on a touchscreen, multi-touch it all over the place, feed it into whatever DAW or synth you were playing with, and you had touch control over everything, over MIDI, all internally, all on the same machine. You could do DAW control, you could do synth control, you know, whatever you like. As long as it was MIDI, it was fine, it was good. I did a video all about it back in 2013. I mean, it's that long ago. But sadly, the development on it was just painfully slow, painfully slow. It was almost impossible to get little things fixed or little improvements made, and it did have a number of issues. Anyway, about 18 months ago, version 2 arrived. Hooray! And I went to download it because the license I had bought was the lifetime of upgrades license version of emulator software. But sadly, no, they told me that no, that was only applicable to Emulator 1. This is Emulator 2. This is a completely different piece of software. So your lifetime upgrades doesn't apply to version 2. Right. Okay. And it was at this time that Touch Innovations came along and it sort of changed into that. I mean, the problem has always been that Smith & Martin were always too busy going off to DJ parties and doing the whole big, have these big touchscreen rigs that they sell with the emulator software built in for DJs. It's fantastic, it's awesome, it's many, many thousands of pounds. And they tour that around the world and they go to gigs and clubs and have a wonderful time. And they forget about the potential within the emulator software by itself for people using normal touchscreens or people on hybrid laptops, on the Surface. Things like that. It could be an awesome product. But they seem to think that 18 months ago that people would pay $20 a month to use the emulator software. It was just mad. I mean, there wasn't a big user base in the first place because of the number of people using touchscreens was small and is growing all the time. And the last thing you want to do is saddle them up with $20 a month forever to keep on using a quite experimental piece of software that, in my view, you would use occasionally in the odd project, or you'd just play with it every now and again when you get some spare time. It's something that would grow on you, that you would find the usefulness in the odd gig, not usefulness every week, every month. That was just mad. So I just had to leave it behind. And I never got the opportunity to try out version 2 until now. Because now they've dropped the subscription and all that messing about, and it's now just $59 for a license. Bam, there you go. That's far more reasonable. Thank you for that. I can't believe it took you so long to work that out. And while the potential remains high and while touchscreen usage is rising all the time, this could be the moment. This could be the moment for emulator software. But it has to work, and you have to promote it, and you have to do tutorials, and you have to provide templates. You have to help people use it and inspire us into its use. So if I can get it working, I'll do another video on it without a doubt. But you know, now that I've got all this off my chest, Touch Innovations, you know, get in touch. What can I do to help? Right, enough of this computerized nonsense. Let's have a look at some modular bits. First of all, the very annoyingly named 000. I don't know why people do that. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, does it? Anyway, they produce some really sort of edgy distortion and percussion modules, and they've just come up with what I see as the absolute perfect mixer module. I'm always after a bit of a mixer for the modular stuff because, I mean, you tend to end up using VCAs, which is all right, but they kind of want to be used for other things. I just need a simple way of combining all the sounds from my oscillators and other bits and pieces into one place that I can easily mix and that I can easily mute on and off. But they have this new module called the 8CT8, 8, I don't know, 8 active, 8, I don't know, activate, activate, 8, I don't know, I don't really care what it's called, but it's great. It's a little module, it's compact, it's not a huge mixer thing like I've seen many modules become. This has just got 8 of those wonderful light up LED sliders, it's got mute buttons, and it's got 8 inputs. I mean, that's all I want, that's all I'm after, and you can split it up into 2 4-channel mixers, or use some for CV, some for audio, whatever you like. It looks ace. There's no price or availability on it yet, but they did take it to the We Are Robots sort of festival of electronic music that was in London last month, which is somewhere where they also ran some DIY workshops, which is excellent. You can get to build some of their modules, and that's the sort of thing that they really like to do. So hopefully this will also be available as a kit, which would be great. Let's do that. And we have a gaggle of sequencers to talk about this month. Just having to relocate because the sun keeps disappearing. Firstly, we have the Varigate from Malekko Heavy Industries. It's a fabulous little unit. I've seen lots of videos on it, and again, it's got these wonderful light up LED sliders that I just think are the best things ever. They should be on every single module. And I've seen like DivKid videos on it with the lights going up and down and backwards and up, down and backwards. There's lots of randomness and probability going on and gates and moving stuff. But the current Varigate 4 is a gate sequencer, as in the name. It kicks out gate signals. That means it can trigger stuff. It doesn't send out note information, it doesn't send out CV, it sends out gate. So it's triggering stuff. So it's for percussion. It's a drum machine. It's essentially a drum programming in a little module, which is great, but that's not really what I want it for. I want stuff that does interesting melodic things. So anyway, Malekko released a while ago a Varigate 8 Plus version, which had like 8 channels, obviously, of gate sequencer going on, again, for percussion, but it also included 2 channels of CV. And I think people like that. I think people like that a lot. And so now they've just announced the Varigate 4 Plus. So we're back to our little compact 4-channel sequencer, but this time it also includes CV. You can either configure it to be 4 channels of CV, 2 channels of CV gate, or 4 channels of gate, which is great. So you've got notes in there and percussion if you want it. And of course, I've added in a lot of features that you need to make the note side of things interesting, like quantization, like scales, like glide. And then you can use the randomness and the probability and all these other factors to move these sequencers all over the place. And it's because of its 4 channels, it's 4 independent channels of sequencing. I think that's really, really very exciting. And don't tell anyone, but I might have pre-ordered one. I think it's an important module. I think it's something which is really going to work in what it is I'm trying to achieve. What is it? What is it that I'm trying to achieve with my modular? I don't know. I think we'll get there. I think we're getting there. I think I'm getting it. I think I am. The next sequencer we have is the Toolbox from 1010 Music. They have taken their sort of generic digital touchscreen module box and they've stuffed in some sequencing software, which is probably the best use for it, to be honest. That touchscreen now becomes a piano roll editor. It becomes the ability to trigger different patterns just by tapping them. And of course, the display itself shows a lot of great information when you're using a sequencer. And all of those patch points, you know, it's perfect for sequencing. The Toolbox sequencer gives you 4 channels of gate sequencing, 4 channels of CV sequencing, and 4 lots of modulation wranglingness. And you should be able to upload firmware from the other boxes into it as well. However, as I understand it, this is a Series 2 box, which means if you have one of the older boxes, the sampler box, the effects box, or the synth box, then you are not going to be able to put this firmware in the older one, which I think is a shame because that's one of the sort of the key selling points of this particular way of doing things. You know, they have this one box into which you can load lots of different firmwares. You know, that I think is really interesting, really attractive. Something that really stands out about these boxes. But if you then can't do that because they're upgrading the hardware, then that's a shame, I think. But as it stands, it looks to be an interesting sequencer. Maybe more interesting is this weirdly sort of utility looking box called the Hermod Modular Brain. It's a strange name, but behind the strange name and the weird looking front, it has a quite extraordinary 8-track sequencer. But it's not just 8 tracks of sequencing, it's not just notes on and off. Oh no, it can be CV, it can be modulation, it can be LFO, it can be aftertouch, it can be velocity, clock tracks, whatever you like. It can generate 8 tracks of all sorts of different stuff, all of different lengths, all of different timings, all over the place. So you're not only controlling notes and percussion, you're also controlling modulation and LFO and clock and timing and velocity and aftertouch, and all these other things are kind of spreading out from this central unit. I mean, they call it a brain. I mean, that, I guess, is the idea of it, is it can control everything. It can do everything. Is that what we want? I'm not sure. But also within the box, you've got scale and harmonizing and quantizing and swinging and tempo changes, chancing and delays and scales and all sorts of stuff, all within the one module. So it kind of has everything. And as I say, do we want a single module to have everything? But there you have it. It's an extraordinarily powerful little box. And then fresh out of Tokyo, we have the rather cleverly named Quencer DLX. Yeah, that's quite good. What it is, it's not really a sequencer, it's more of a kind of an advanced pattern generating arpeggiator. It has a number of patterns built in that you can then manipulate and change and quantize and scale and range sort of all over the place in order to generate the sort of pattern that you're after. But rather than entering individual notes, you're just kind of modulating it and pushing it towards the sort of sound that you're after. It has this great radial interface with these touch plates under each LED that allows you to access all the features. But the one surprising feature perhaps is that actually inside is a dual oscillator wavetable synth. It's kind of got its own 12-bit craziness going on inside the module itself, so you can create patterns with that, or of course you can also CV out to other stuff. But you don't need to, because it has its own built-in synthesizer with multiple waveforms and all sorts of editing and stuff, and modulation you can do to that. So that's quite interesting. But the one thing that really appeals to me is that it has this record function. You just tap record and then any knob movements, anything that you do, any changes that you make are all recorded into that pattern. So it's like capturing automation within the pattern, and then it all plays that back for you and keeps on going. That's brilliant. I like that a lot. Another thing coming out of Tokyo was the poorly named MI.1E. Kind of looks like Mile. Is it supposed to look like Mile? I don't know. It's supposed to look like MIDI interface 1E. I'm not sure. The naming of things is a difficult matter. I find that it's one of those things that gets my goat all the time. Anyway, what this is a Bluetooth MIDI to CV converter. Oh yes, it's a little module. It's got 8 patch outputs for CV outputs, and it has a Bluetooth module built in so that you can Bluetooth yourself into it and send a load of modulation and bits and pieces to your modular. They were running it with an iPad and their own app, which provides note sequencing or drum gate sequencing and LFO modulation. And it's kind of a really cool way and simple way of bringing the power of your iPad and that software control into your modular. Again, is that something that we want? I don't know. Some people might want that. I think personally the integration of computer and modular is something which should always be possible, should always be up in the air, because it harbours an awful lot of potential, and I don't think you should exclude computers entirely just because you're using modular. I don't think there's a reason to do that. I think we can make use of everything, and this is one of those occasions that makes that ridiculously simple. It's just a little module, 8 sockets, messing around with stuff on your iPad, pours into your modular. That's great. Yeah, liking that a lot. Right, a shout out to the old school now, MIDI Quest. Oh yes, MIDI Quest has been around since the 1940s, and it is the original MIDI editor librarian software. What they did is created a graphical user interface to allow you to edit all those really crap MIDI synths that had no controls at all on the front back in the 80s and 90s. It's got hundreds and hundreds of synthesizers in there. Whatever synthesizer you could possibly buy, you can pull up a MIDI Quest editor for it and get some really sort of dated looking graphical user face control over it. I mean, phenomenally useful. It's probably one of the most useful pieces of software ever created if you are someone who has a bunch of MIDI synths and wants to get in deep with the programming. Well, it may have remained unchanged for about 20 years until now. They've just gone and dumped it onto the iPad. Yes, there is now a MIDI Quest iPad app which features hundreds and hundreds of synths with exactly the same kind of GUI interfaces that it's always had. I mean, why fix something that isn't broken, right? Except that with fingers on a touch interface, it kind of is different. Because the problem is that all the controls on the iPad look really, really small, really, really weeny for fat fingers. So I'm not entirely sure that they've thought this through properly. Also, in the one app, you get hundreds and hundreds of editors. Surely, I think it would have been better to sell each editor individually. You know, a couple of dollars for an editor for your JP8000 or an editor for your DX7. I mean, I think that might have been a smarter move because no one has 250 synths. Nobody wants all that garbage. What they'd really want would be a properly designed, nice, touch-friendly GUI for their old MIDI synths. That's what you should have done. But as it is, you get editors for everything, which is awesome because it is a phenomenally great piece of software, a phenomenally useful piece of software. I'm just not sure that the iPad is the best fit for that because you really want all of those editing saved within your project, saved within your DAW, and that's best done really on a desktop. But what do I know? Maybe it's perfect for you. Who knows? MIDI Quest, well done for still being alive and having a go at something. That's all I can say. A couple of weirdo bits of software for you now. The MusineKit2 and the Gleetchlab4. Now, MusineKit2 is sort of like an adventure in exploring sound synthesis and interesting sampley stuff. It was created by Senso Music, the people behind Usain Hollyhock, along with Le MusineKit, some French national something or other. Anyway, it's kind of like an educational tool. It's there designed to allow people and educators and kids and adults and anyone who likes to play with sounds, play with synthesis, play with polyrhythms and sequencing and looping and all sorts of stuff in a really sort of interesting and engaging interface. It's great. It's a load of fun. You could just turn it on and leave it for your kids to play with. They'd have a great time. It's pretty cool and it's completely free. Go and get yourself a copy. Gleetchlab4 is more of a madhouse of sort of musical manipulation. It was created by Giorgio Sancristoforo, and it's the way that he creates his own albums, his own music. He sort of invents and programs this interface and then gets stuck in there, and out the other side comes his music. And he's now offering up that environment for all of us to play in. There's no timeline, it's not a traditional DAW in that sense, rather it bases itself upon these 6 loop players. You stick in these loops from wherever you like, set them going, and then you manipulate the heck out of them. You can add on granulizers and spectral fractal things and grungulizers and gristalizers and filtering and modulation and time stretching and messing around and just make a complete and utter mess of the entire thing. It looks like a load of fun. It's only, sadly, available on Apple and will set you back 15 whole euros. This caught my eye. It's a virtual audio mixer with VST plugin support. You can jam in a load of inputs from your audio interface, put them through as channels, and then apply all sorts of VST plugins. It's designed for conferences, for podcasting, for little band setups and perhaps churches and things like that. So you could mix through a computer without having to have a physical mixer. Just straight into your audio interface, straight through the software, straight back out again. But what I thought is that it might be a really cool way of mixing various synthesizer and modular sources. And when you're starting to have all this external hardware now, all these boxes that are throwing up different sorts of sounds, and you need a mixer to keep them all under control. But a mixer, again, is taking up a load of space, whereas you probably already have a laptop or a computer knocking around. This could be a great streamlined way of adding plugins to your setup. I mean, again, you're going to have a load of plugins as well, aren't you? I mean, we've all got plugins knocking around because we've been building them up for years. We may well have all gone hardware now, but that shouldn't mean that we can't use our computer when it becomes creatively useful. And I think with this, it does become creatively useful. You can, of course, do a similar thing with your DAW. You could load up Cubase and run everything through that, but you've got to set up a session and sort that out, and you've got to work with tracks and different windows and bits and pieces. And it can work, but it's a bit clunky. With CMixer, it's streamlined, it's there, it supports your plugins, and it's instant. You double click it and it's there, you're ready to go. I think that could be quite interesting. It's quite touch friendly, not multi-touch, but single touch friendly. So I'm gonna look into it a little bit and do a video on it, I think, because I reckon I could pull all of my modular outputs through my audio interface, through this, and start adding some VST plugins to start modulating, to start affecting and processing all of the signal chain that's coming out of my modular. I think that could make for a very interesting sort of live performance rig. And finally, at the Audio Developers Conference, they talked about the future of MIDI. You may remember that I had a bit of a rant about MIDI some time ago. And I know, MIDI is great. It's awesome. It's the thing that's tied us all together and enabled our machines to talk to each other for many years. It's awesome. It's brilliant. Yes, but it's also stupid. It's also dumb and silly and frustrating and old. I mean, we can do so much more now with machines, with computers, with stuff, with just regular hardware that MIDI can't understand, can't grasp, and can't deal with. And isn't it time that the thing that connects our entire studio together had a bit of an upgrade, brought itself into, you know, a new world and a new understanding of how it can be helpful and creative to us and save us a whole load of time? That would be great, I think. Anyway, electronic instrument designer Ben Supper, who now works for Roley, gave this fantastic lecture on the future of MIDI, on something called MIDI Capability Inquiry. And this is what he, along with MIDI.org and the MIDI Manufacturers Association, are kind of putting forward as the way forward. It's the path to a new MIDI. It's not a complete change or replacement or revolution. It has to be something which takes MIDI 1.0, if you like, and moves it on. It has to still support the original MIDI, but it's time to pull more things together. And I think what they've done is brilliant. It's genius because it's so small and yet revolutionary. It's just tiny things which you kind of almost think already exist, but they don't. And this is a way to ensure that they will. It's made up of three sort of interlocking parts. The first part is protocol negotiation. It's the ability of two devices to switch to a higher level protocol that offers a richer MIDI experience. Two devices have to be able to switch to that mode, and if they're unable to make that happen, then switch back to regular MIDI 1.0, which prevents the whole thing from falling apart and allows it to run and work regardless of whether it can reach the new protocol or not. So the first thing, devices must be able to switch up to this protocol from standard MIDI. The next thing is profiles. They want to be able to put different instruments, different devices into more specific profiles. I mean, at the moment we have one global profile, which is general MIDI, and many things adhere to that, so that you know that a volume control is going to control the volume on anything that supports general MIDI, that the drums will always be on channel 10, that piano will always be the first preset, that kind of thing. That's fine, but it's far too broad and far too loose. So with the profiles aspect, they're bringing in these definitions of smaller categories of instruments. So for instance, if you had an organ, it would have a certain profile, which means that all the drawbars operate in the same way and have the same information and the same controller numbers. Similarly, you could have a subtractive synth profile, because every subtractive synth that you have has the same controls. It has the cutoff, the resonance, the envelope, the VCA, the LFO, all that stuff could be mapped in a profile so that it's always available and always the same on every instrument. You'd have one for virtual strings, for electric pianos, for FM synthesis, for granular synthesis, you know, whatever. And what this means, what the reality of this is that you have one particular subtractive synth, for instance, that you've got wired into your system, and you've created a sequence, you've created automation and modulation that's all pumping into that one synth. And then you think to yourself, well, I wonder how that would sound on another synth. So you take that out, put another synth in. With MIDI, you're screwed. You're lucky if the notes are even going to go across, let alone anything else. But with this, with a profile, it would mean that all of the controls are the same. So all your automation would work on this other synth, on this other device. It would be the same for virtual synths and virtual instruments. They would all suddenly have a standard way of controlling everything with these profiles, provided that all the manufacturers sign up to the idea of creating and supporting these profiles. Part 3, and this is probably the most revolutionary, is property exchange. That is the ability to exchange data in a two-way conversation. No way, you can't do that. Oh yes, that's the idea, so that you can say, what is your value knob over there? And it'll go, my value is 6. You take that back, oh look, it's 6. So, I mean, that sounds idiotic, but we can't do that with MIDI. With MIDI, you can create a dump of data from your synthesizer and dump it all into something and then sift through that data. But there's nothing that just simply tells you what that knob is, what its values are, what its values could be, and how it changes. There's nothing that does that. Property Exchange allows that to happen. It gives you a two-way flow of information so that everything knows what everything else is. And that's how the profiles can work. Because if it has the same profile, then it can take that information and put that information into something new, provided that it can adopt the same protocol, which is where the protocol part comes in. So it's interesting how it's all interconnected and how it's designed in some ways to fail. It's designed to continue to work even when the better stuff doesn't work, and to continue to support MIDI 1.0. It's fascinating stuff. The other thing I talked about is taking away the speed limit, because there's this artificial speed limit applied to the MIDI DIN socket. Because of the nature of that hardware socket, it's possible to overflow with too much data, and so it's been artificially restricted, and so also artificially restricted in software. So in Windows, for instance, over USB, the data that comes through a USB connection, which has nothing to do with MIDI DIN, nothing to do with a MIDI DIN socket, is restricted to the same flow of data as a physical MIDI DIN socket, which is ridiculous. And it's about time that was lifted. I mean, particularly as the guy comes from Roly, I mean, their C-board controllers are generating a huge amount of MIDI data, and the speed limit is really quite a problem and restrictive. And they need to lift that to allow better data and more data to be coming through. And with this new version of MIDI, MIDI HD, as they don't seem to want to call it, that's going to start being an issue because there's a lot of data going to and from and a lot more stuff going on. I mean, all of it is completely awesome. It's very exciting. I've no idea how it's all going to come together or work, or how far in the future any of this is. But I think it's a really exciting development. Is that enough for now? I think that might be enough for now, because I'm freezing my buns off sitting here, I have to say, as the sun keeps trying to disappear. It's certainly November now, I can vouch for that. So the other videos I've done this month, I've done a whole video on the multi-touch within Bitwig Studio. Haha, I've done that at last. It's there, go and check it out. And I also did a video of my building of the Turing machine, my first DIY modular project, which was awesome. It was so much fun. And it's such a great journey to see the terror of me trying to solder stuff together. So I would go and check that out as well. Over the next couple of weeks, I hope to do videos showing Cubase and Pro Tools on the Surface Pro 2017. I hope to perhaps do a little video on the CMixer, and also Erica Synths are sending me a couple of modules to review, which is interesting. And hopefully that'll kind of kickstart me into reviewing and talking about individual Eurorack modules. So that's exciting. And I still have Waveform and Reason 10 to review, and I also want to make a whole load of music. And please, if you like what I do, then it would be completely awesome if you would support me financially. 19 awesome people have already signed up on my Patreon page, and I'm over halfway towards my first goal of $100 a month. I'm not going to get rich. This is not about getting rich. This is about supporting me and helping me generate the sort of content that you want to see, because it buys me time. It gives me an opportunity to focus more on video making. And you can see it as just buying me a beer or a cup of coffee or a magazine subscription. So do go and check that out and just see what you think, because I would just really appreciate it. So there we go. That's November. It'll soon be Christmas. And in the meantime, go make some tunes.